All right, I'm happy to kick things off, Mary Kate, if we're ready.
Perfect, thank you.
Excellent. Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Cradle to Career Data and Tools Advisory Board meeting. Welcome to our advisory board members, welcome to our team here at Cradle to Career, and welcome to members of the public who are joining us. My name is Mary Ann Bates. I'm the Executive Director of the Cradle to Career office. Before we get started, let me turn it over to our Spanish interpreter for a few notes. Next slide, please.
Thank you. Muy buenos días a aquellos que nos acompañan en español. Queremos dejarles saber que tenemos interpretación al vivo para la sesión del día de hoy. Para acceder a ese canal, lo que hará, en la parte inferior de su pantalla encontrará un icono con un globo que dice Interpretation o Interpretación. Selecciónelo y de ahí seleccione su idioma Spanish o español para escuchar el programa enteramente en español. And for those listening in English, please note interpretation services are being offered for today's session. To listen to comments or questions given in Spanish, please also select the globe icon at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation, then select your language, English, and you'll be able to hear the live rendering of those comments into English. Thank you, Mary Ann. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Mark. Before we begin, I would like to invite Jane Harrington to call the roll to establish a quorum for today's meeting.
Good morning, everybody. You can just say present when I call your name. Alex Adams.
Present.
Jason Morgan.
Present.
Tamika Connor. Amber Jacobo. Brendan Livingston.
Present.
Jennifer Orlick.
Present.
Thank you. Laura Owen.
Present.
Liberty Van Natten.
Present.
Davis Vo.
Present.
Lisa Chavez.
Present.
Kathy Huang. Reagan Faust.
Present.
Heather Huff. Jacob Jackson.
Present.
Vikash Reddy.
Present.
Marshall Anthony Jr.
Present.
We have 12 present. Quorum established.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you. So with that, we will begin. I'm going to start by reviewing the agenda. So we'll start with a couple of updates about the office and our work to keep you in the loop on the work and where we're at. And then the second item is going to review the new process that was established by the governing board for how you as advisory boards make formal recommendations to the governing board. This was an open question when we met last in the fall. And so I'm happy to walk through that at a fairly detailed level to ensure that we answer any questions and we all understand the new processes. And then we'll review upcoming meetings, timelines, and service terms for the rest of this year. And then the more substantive agenda item will be Ryan leading a discussion on the planned teacher training and retention dashboard, getting your input on that. We will have public comment towards the end. So any members of the public, please feel free to share your comments during that time, and then we'll adjourn. So that's the overview for today. And with that, I'm happy to dive into my updates on our work as an office. So the update is organized around the three main areas of our work. So as you know, we're working to build an analytical data set that brings together existing data points that are collected at the state level. And that becomes the foundation for our dashboards, the query builder, and the research request process. The second area of work is around the practical tools for students and families. And the third area of work is around our community engagement. So I'll talk about each of those three areas. For the analytical data set first, what have we focused on since we last talked with you in the fall? We've been focused on completing our procurements. I'll have more about that in a moment. We've onboarded our relevant contractors. We launched a security policies task force. So that task force is composed of the information security officers of our data partners who are working collaboratively with our team to refine and finalize the security protocols for the data system. And that is an important precursor to then finalizing the detailed plans for file transfer with the partners. So we're engaging with our individual data partners on that right now. Next slide. All right, so relevant procurements for the analytical data set. You can see here a list of the recently completed ones. I think the last time we convened as a group, we shared that we were close to being done with the procurement for a system integrator. That's the largest contract for bringing together the build of the data system. But we've also completed a number of additional procurements. So independent verification and validation, security consultant, project manager, and then different components of the technology stack for building the cloud-based data warehouse. We also have an open or planned procurement around user experience and user interface as well. Next slide. This is a snapshot of a progress board that I shared at the February governing board meeting. So I wanted to share it with you here as well. There are a lot of steps that precede the actual transfer of data from our data partners to us. So starting on the left with identifying the partner liaisons. So who are the members of the technical team who work with our technical staff, meeting with them, finalizing data definitions, all the way through to the security task force participation. And then in orange, you see the actual steps to transfer the data. And on the left, you can see the acronyms for our data partners. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So this is a snapshot as of February. This was as of the February board meeting. You can see that our data partners are part of that security task force, have identified the partner liaison, and we're meeting with the different teams. I will note the ones that say on hold, there are a couple of partners, for example, the non-public universities who are scheduled to share data at a later time in our 5-year timeline. And so we're putting those work with them on hold until it's the right phase in our timeline to be working with them. But this is a snapshot of where we were at as of the February board meeting. So I wanted to share that with you. Teacher training and retention dashboard. So we'll have a more detailed conversation about this later in the meeting, but this is just a big picture overview of how we've been talking about this dashboard. So first, at the different governing board meetings over the last year, last year in February, the board discussed the scope of the dashboard and discussed expanding the scope of the dashboard. Well, actually, if we can drop a link in the chat either now or later when we're at this agenda item, we have an overview page that was in the meeting materials for today that shows all of this in more detail. So the board discussed the scope of the dashboard last February. Last summer, the board discussed and then our office launched a number of task forces to refine data definitions and identify what may be possible to include. And then in August, this was included in our work plan for this fiscal year. And in November, the board discussed the need for clarity on process for adding data points to the P20W data set. So for any members of the public listening in, P20W is the shorthand used to describe our analytical data set. So essentially the K through 12 higher education and workforce data that comes together. And the board discussion was centered on the fact that to create this teacher training and retention dashboard, we would need some data points from our data partners that were not already included in the legal agreements that we signed last summer. So in February at their board meeting, the governing board defined the process for adding additional data points to the P20W data set. That's mapped out in the governance manual that's linked from our resources page. So the key next steps is for our office to work with the relevant data providers who are part of this dashboard to clarify the possible data points. What data points do they already collect and validate that would be feasible to include in this dashboard? And then our user-centered design work is focusing on dashboard relevant topics. And the plan is for a more detailed update from all of the involved parties at the May governing board meeting. All right, so that was the update around the analytical data set that we're building. For the practical tools for students, there are two named in the legislation that we've been talking about. One is California Colleges.edu. And as you know, this is a platform that is intended to become a one-stop shop for applying to financial aid and applying to public universities here in California, and also for college and career planning. So if you look at our website again on the resources page and look at our 5-year timeline and 12-month work plan, you can see some of the detailed technical implementation improvements that CCGI is making with relevant data partners here. One of the things we're working on that we discussed with your colleagues on the Community Engagement Advisory Board on Tuesday is plan coordinated communications around the scale up of these services with our partners. And then I also wanted to flag, there's a second practical tool for students named in the legislation that established Cradle to Career, and that's eTranscript California. And we haven't talked about that as much over the past year, but in our 12-month work plan, we identified the next 6 months as a time where we're planning to do focus groups and interviews and needs assessment, if you will, to understand the needs of students and educators better on this platform and how we can work with our partners at eTranscript to facilitate this becoming a seamless platform for transferring transcripts across higher education segments. We have a number of relevant procurements related to engagement and communications. As you can see from how we opened the meeting, we're happy to have a completed contract for language and interpretation services. So we're now able to provide live Spanish interpretation at our public meetings. We also completed a procurement for website design. We know that the current website has some information a bit buried and it can be challenging to navigate. So we're thrilled to have completed a procurement for website design, and that's an important priority for us over the next year to be able to relaunch a revised website. Next slide, please. Cradle to Career branding. We talked with your colleagues at the Community Engagement Advisory Board about this, and also with members of the public through our regular community conversations. So the two logos that you see here are the finalists. Shannon is working with a designer to finalize these now and refine one to then become the new Cradle to Career logo, and refined our name and tagline as being California's Cradle to Career data system, connecting data and insights to advance equitable futures. So more to come on this. I've appreciated your input. Press and community events, just sharing a number of recent press community events that we were at. I'll put in a plug here. If you are going to an event where you would like to talk about the work of Cradle to Career, please reach out to us. Shannon has template slides, materials, one-pagers, things that you can use and that we can support you with to prepare talking points. If you would like us to join you at an event, if you would like to bring us along or invite us to a conversation, please feel free to do that. Or if you're speaking and you flag it for us, we can help amplify that through our channels. So please don't hesitate to be in touch with Shannon about that. We are also continuing our community conversations. We developed community guidelines. There's a nice blog post about this on our news page. These are the kind of the norms that we at Cradle to Career commit to holding ourselves to as we engage with communities and invite others to join us in that as well. And also just put in a plug, if you missed it, please check out the recording of our last community conversation. We had Drs. Chris Nellam and Vikash Reddy join us for a conversation about the importance of disaggregating data to advance equity and how to think about that in a nuanced way. And it was a really interesting conversation with a lot of engagement from the public, dialing in and having a lot of engagement in the chat. So I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot from the conversation and wanted to put in a plug for that as well here. Another thing we've worked on with the team is to develop staff values for our team. So these are the values that we look to guide us as we're making difficult decisions or critical junctions. You can see advancing equity, transparency, accountability, collaboration, curiosity. And sometimes our goal for this is that this doesn't just become a poster that's on the wall in the break room and that we forget about, but really something that's guiding our work day to day. So for example, we're thinking about how to build these values into our performance reviews as we assess our own work, as we provide feedback to each other. How are we living up to these staff values? As we do hiring, we look to these staff values to think about what kinds of questions we want to ask in the interviews and how we want to do that. So we're really hoping to hold ourselves to this, wanted to share it with you as well. And sometimes we engage with this in a lighthearted way. So whenever I need to tell the team an embarrassing story about myself, it's like, all right, value, transparency, here we go. But also for more serious things, right? When we're faced with a challenge in collaborative work, there are always going to be challenges around communication or misunderstandings and things that we iron out. Trying to approach that with curiosity. right? Instead of frustration. So, why is it that this individual or this organization reached out in this way or has this concern? How can I approach that with curiosity as opposed to in a negative way? So this is what we're aspiring to. We won't always live up to it, but we'll do our best. Just wanted to share that with you as well. Speaking of the team, we are hiring. Wanted to flag 2 positions that we currently have open. Our senior data engineer. This is a senior position who will work with our data infrastructure team to build out that analytical data set. So that's currently live. We also have an AGPA position, budget and contract analyst position open. So if you know someone who loves a good spreadsheet and this kind of work, please encourage them to apply. And I also realized yesterday, I believe, we launched our research manager position. So that's the latest one that's brand new. So in your head, just move research manager up into the open position, which will be an exciting position on Ryan's team as well. So please take a look at that. If you go scan this QR code, it goes to a filtered view of the Cal Careers page that shows all of our open positions. And I'm just super grateful for all the amplification that you've been doing on LinkedIn and on social media to get the word out to your networks. It's really important. We want to make sure that our positions are very widely advertised so that a wide range of people can apply. And then just flagging quickly, we'll have 2 other senior positions, Deputy Director for Communications and Ledge Affairs. Those positions will be part of Shannon's team. So we'll be launching those soon as well. We recently hired our General Counsel and Principal Data Architect positions. And now I'd like to specially introduce our new Chief of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships. So I'll turn it over to Mary Kate so she can introduce herself.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, members. My name is Mary Kate Cruz-Jones. I'm very appreciative to have this new role and to join the C2C team. Very excited. I just wanted to share a quick little bit about myself. I began my state career at the Medical Board of California as the board member liaison there. And most recently, I worked at the Department of Consumer Affairs, where I led a new data initiative and performed data analysis and collection for all 37 boards and bureaus that were under the department. Additionally, I spearheaded many special projects for the department's board and bureau relations, such as board member orientation training and a board leadership training to teach about best practices for running a public meeting. So that's just a little flavor of my professional background. Super nice to meet everybody, and I look forward to working with you further. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mary Kate. We're thrilled to have her on the team. All right, budget update. So as you may know, last summer in August, the governing board reviewed a budget request and provided feedback on it. That was then included in the governor's January 10th proposed budget. It's for approximately $4.9 million in additional ongoing funding for Cradle to Career and 10 additional staff positions, which would bring our total staff positions to 26. We participated in the hearing on March 16th for Senate Subcommittee 4. So if you're interested, you can take a look at that. I do want to flag, we created a one-pager for that hearing that might be useful for you overall. It's just one page. It highlights our mission and vision. So, why do we exist? What work are we hoping to accomplish? And then outlines 3 problems that we're aiming to address and how our 3 areas of work map to that. So if you're looking for an easy leave behind, or you are talking with a group and you're just interested in providing an introduction to Cradle to Career, this one-pager might be useful for you. So wanted to flag that. All right, before we dive into the nuts and bolts of the governance manual, let me just pause and see if there are any questions from advisory board members related to the update. All right, so next we're going to dive into the details of the governance manual. By way of background, as part of the meeting materials, if you're a member of the public, you can find this on our website on the event page for today. You can see the entire governance manual. What we're going to do in a moment is kind of walk through the big picture And then I've cut and pasted the relevant sections of the governance manual as kind of visible on the slides. So we're going to walk through this together because it's fairly complex, but important because it relates to the work that you as an advisory board have the opportunity to do, if you would like, between now and your meeting in the fall. So process to date. Last November, the governing board tasked an ad hoc committee of the governing board with making annual updates to the Cradle to Career Governance Manual. So the governance manual is the document that kind of provides the overview of all of the relevant policies and approaches for how the governing board does its work. And there's a section in that governing board manual, governance manual for each of the advisory boards as well. So the governing board tasks annually updates this via an ad hoc committee. Separately, so that governance manual ad hoc committee drew on ideas generated by a separate ad hoc committee of our two advisory boards. So some of you participated on this in December 16th, where you as advisory board members provided ideas about how the governance of the advisory boards could be helpfully updated. So now I'm going to walk through those changes that the governing board made relevant to your governance that's in the governance manual. A lot of use of the word governing, governance, and ad hoc together, so I'll try not to trip over that. All right, so this is a big picture overview to what the edits were. So the first was just to align the language on what the responsibilities of each board are with what's in Ed Code. The quorum for the advisory boards was adjusted to be a simple majority, so that's 9 members of the 16. And then the language clarifies that there are times when advisory board members are making suggestions as opposed to formal recommendations. And this was a question that some of you raised in your fall meeting and raised and follow-up questions to our office, where you asked, this kind of real-time input in these meetings, is that what it meant when it said advisory boards are going to provide recommendations to the governing board, or what does that look like? So the heart of what we're going to walk through now is this distinction between informal suggestions that you're giving to our office, like you will later today when Ryan shares information about that, about the dashboards that we're planning. So those are kind of informal suggestions, you're making them, we as an office are taking those into consideration, we're learning from you, and distinguishing that from formal recommendations that you make as a body, and then advance to the governing board in a structured way. So the governance, the fourth point here, the governance manual now describes the process for bringing forward formal recommendations. And for your colleagues in the Community Engagement Advisory Board, what that looks like for them is that there's a community engagement framework that was developed in the planning process, and they will then make recommendations for how to update that, how to ensure that there's strong feedback loops, that reaching communities, et cetera. So that's what they'll be working on. You on the Data and Tools Advisory Board are going to have the opportunity to provide formal recommendations on additional P20W data points that could be added, the researcher data request process, and tools such as dashboards or operational tools. And then the final point for the updates was to align the decision-making for recommendations with the agreement scale used by the governing board rather than by consensus. So this is defining the voting process. Okay, so that's the overview. Now we're going to dive into the specific language. So this is going chunk by chunk through the language that's in the governance manual. So through feedback provided in meetings, the Data and Tools Advisory Board members offer suggestions for the governing board in the office, including but not limited to. So this is the suggestion side of things. This is like what you're doing today. Informal suggestions, ideas, things for us to consider. And that could be on things like the usability, accessibility, and usefulness of dashboard visualizations, data points to include in centralized data sets, operational tools. So that's kind of the informal suggestions in meetings that you might share with us. And now let's talk about the formal recommendation process. So this is when you as a body advance more formal recommendations. So when there are significant gaps regarding whether the data system is providing access to actionable information, the Data and Tools Advisory Board may develop recommendations for the governing board on which tools to provide or which data points to include in centralized data sets. So this is now the process. So in the fall advisory board meeting, advisory board members may bring forward proposals for ways to address the significant gap. There are 3 separate forms for 3 types of changes. So each of you could bring forward a proposal on any of these areas. So data request process, tools such as dashboards or operational tools, and data points. So we'll develop a form, and then each member of the advisory board, if you wish, can prepare a proposal for a way to address a significant gap. For example, on the data request process, this might entail things like, the nature of the issue with the data request process, what action should be taken to address the issue, who would benefit from this, who would implement the action, how does the action relate to the mission and vision of C2C. This is hypothetical right now because we haven't built out the data request process, right? But perhaps in future years, this might be something where you might have recommendations for how to strengthen or improve that. Tools such as dashboards and operational tools. So again, like what's the nature of the gap that you've identified? What could be developed, right? Who could do that? How does this relate to the mission and vision? And then for data points, so this again is about the analytical data set that we're bringing together, or the P20W data set. You could also provide recommendations for what data point should be added, who would use it, how the data point would be used, who would provide it, whether it already exists in a state level data set, right? Is this something that one of our data partners is already collecting and validating? Or would it require a need for it to be newly collected, right? What population should be included and how that relates to the mission and vision of C2C. Now, relating to this on data points, one of the ideas that you had shared in that December ad hoc committee was a desire to ensure that as you put forward, proposals for recommendations, that those can be as informed as possible. And so what we plan to do is to invite the process that's described in the governance manual is that our office would convene a public meeting in the summer. So before the timeline where you would be developing specific proposals and recommendations, we would convene a public meeting where we invite our data providers, subject matter experts to attend, so that you can ask questions and they can provide clarification about the data that's already included in our list of data points, about any additional data points that they already collect, so that there can be a dialogue and you can have your questions answered and understand what data points exist and what maybe limitations or context that would be helpful for you to know. So our plan is to have the June 6th meeting, which will be a combined meeting of both advisory boards, serve as that. So we'll be inviting our data partners to have their subject matter experts attend that meeting, so that you can use that summer meeting to just ask the questions that you'd like to better understand the landscape of what data exists, any caveats, limitations, process challenges that it's useful for you to know as you get to know this work and get to know the data that our data providers have. So again, in summary for that summer meeting, answering your questions, and then in the fall, you prepare proposals for those recommendations. So the process that was developed for this is that you would submit these proposal forms 1 month before the advisory board meeting, and then we'd post them on our C2C website so that there's visibility about all the ideas that are coming in. And then we would share a pre-meeting survey with you where you can rank order the proposals. And we'll prepare a rubric to support you in evaluating those proposals and rank ordering them. So you can think about the potential impact and align it with the vision, mission, and authority. One question that the Community Engagement Advisory Board raised on Tuesday is whether they would have the chance to provide input on that rubric. We're happy to do that. We wanted to take on the work of developing the rubric, but it's always easier to provide feedback on something concrete as opposed to a blank page. So what we'll plan to do is prepare that rubric in advance of our summer meeting in June. And then you can provide any feedback or ideas for consideration on that rubric in June. And that way everyone knows kind of what the rubric is going to be before you prepare the proposals. So then in your next meeting in the fall, so in June, you meet to discuss data points and other questions with our data providers. Then at the fall advisory board meeting, Up to 3 proposals that were prioritized via that pre-meeting survey would then be considered and discussed during the meeting. And the advisory board member who submitted the proposal will present the idea to the advisory board, followed by public comment. Then the advisory board members will discuss the proposal to evaluate whether the proposal would effectively address the issue that had been flagged and would meaningfully advance the work of Cradle to Career. Then you could make amendments to the proposal. And then before voting, there would be another period of public comment. So the structure is intended to provide a mechanism for many ideas to come forward, and then for you as a body to prioritize a few that would then advance to the next phase of the process. For the voting structure, so this is the voting agreement scale. So you would then be asked to vote on whether the proposal should be advanced to the office so that it can conduct a feasibility study. So remember in the governance manual, it talks about the flow for this is the advisory boards come up with recommendations. Then our office does a feasibility study. If it involves something relevant to our data partners, we do that feasibility study collaboratively with them. And then based on that feasibility study, then it would advance to the governing board. So that's the order. Let's talk about the vote. The vote requires a simple majority of those present in the meeting, and advisory board members can vote to approve, where you agree or agree with reservations. You can vote to disagree, or you can also abstain. And if you have reservations, you can state those at the time of voting, and those will be entered into the record. So that's the voting process. All right, the feasibility study. So as I mentioned, recommendations are developed, then we as an office do a feasibility study. And then at the spring advisory board meeting, so in the fall, you select and prioritize a number of recommendations. Then between the fall and spring meeting, we do our feasibility study. At the spring meeting, we will present the feasibility studies, and then you can discuss the findings, amend the proposal if needed, and then vote on whether the proposal should be advanced to the governing board as a recommendation. And the same voting protocol would be used for that vote as well. So that's kind of the sequence, right? Conversations with our data partners, formal recommendations prioritized in the fall, feasibility studies over the winter, and then advancing recommendations to the governing board in the spring. Okay, before we go into the meetings and timelines and all of that, let me just pause because we just walked through a lot of dense material, and I want to make sure you have a moment to ask questions or share reflections. Any questions, comments from advisory board members?
I just appreciate there's a process developed now for input. So I think it's a great way to provide input, and I think it's the way it's documented is very clear. So thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate that. The other thing I'll just say out loud is, you're the inaugural advisory board, and we're trying to predict how this process could work well in supporting the governing board and defining all of these processes. We're going to learn together. So I think a really important role that you can play over the next year is also reflecting on how did this process feel and what kinds of input would you like to share on how it can develop over time. So many thanks to you as the brave first advisory board members who are doing this work together with us. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so let's talk about upcoming meetings. All right, so as I mentioned, I wanted to walk through all of that first before we talk about our plan for the meeting so you can have that context. In June, that's that combined meeting that I discussed. So we'll bring together the community engagement and data and tools advisory boards. And that's for 2 reasons. One is that some of you had this idea, that there's a lot of connection points between what the community engagement board and what you are thinking about. Wouldn't it be nice to sometimes have combined meetings? So that's why we're combining the meeting. And the purpose will be to meet with the subject matter experts of our data providers to understand the nuances of the available data. So that's what we'll be doing in June. Our governing board meets quarterly, And their August meeting is the meeting where they'll be appointing new members to the advisory boards. So as you'll recall, you as the inaugural board have staggered terms. So about a third of you have a 1-year term, a third have a 2-year term, and a third have a 3-year term. Moving forward, everyone will have 3-year terms, and they'll be staggered such that each year a third of the board turns over. So in August, that's when the governing board will appoint new members. So those of you with 1-year terms would still attend the June meeting, and then you would be cycling off of the advisory board. And then in October, so October 12th is the next Data and Tools Advisory Board meeting, where we'll prioritize and finalize up to 3 recommendations. Thank you. So just to provide clarity, in terms of the Data and Tools Advisory Board members who were assigned a 1-year term when they were appointed, these are the ones who will cycle off the board in August. And then, as I mentioned, moving forward, all new members will serve a 3-year term. And if you look at page 32 of the governance manual, you can see more details on this. So just, I want to give a special thanks, especially to those of you who are serving the 1-year term. I realize that your first year is very much has been about processes and setting up what these advisory boards look like and how we do the work together. So thank you for your graciousness and knowing that some of the work is kind of just kicking off as you're cycling off. And I just appreciate that as well. So one important note, we've been meeting virtually. And as of July 1st, this summer, the ability to hold Bagley-Keene meetings virtually expires. So I want to make sure this is on your radar. So we'll still have that June meeting virtually, but after that, our meetings will be in person in Sacramento after July 1st. So that fall meeting will be in person. And please be in touch with Mary Kate if you have any questions about the details and the logistics of how we can make sure that that's possible for you. But I just wanted to make sure that's flagged. So unless the legislature were to take action between now and July, as of July 1st, all of our meetings, both these whole board meetings and any ad hoc committees that you decide to hold or create would need to be in person. So I just wanted to make sure that's salient for everyone. So that you can look at your calendars and block off travel time if you're not already in the Sacramento area. All right, any questions on timelines, meetings? Let's see.
Alex, do you want to pose your question?
Thank you so much for everything. You guys are doing just a really great job. So I just wanted to say that while I was on the mic. But my main question was about recruitment I want to make sure as one of the only community college members of the Data and Tools Advisory, the recruitment, are we going to be involved as advisory members in the recruitment for the next round of people, or what does that look like? Just wanted to hear a little bit more.
Thank you for asking that question. We would love for you to be involved. So the timeline for the advisory board selection is that between now and the May board meeting, there's an ad hoc committee of the board, the governing board. Sorry, let me make sure I don't just use the shorthand board. Between now and the governing board's May meeting, the governing board has an ad hoc committee that will be doing the selection of the next advisory board members. And they'll be holding 2 meetings. The first one, which we'll announce and schedule soon, is going to be about the process. So the application, the recruitment materials, and all of that. So please feel free to dial into that meeting if you have any ideas or suggestions you'd like to share as a member of the public in that meeting on recruitment. And then our goal is to launch the application prior to the May governing board meeting so that that's live while we have the governing board meeting, and that can serve as one way of getting the word out. And we would really appreciate it if you would help get the word out for exactly the reasons you mentioned. We want to make sure that there's representation and different perspectives from a wide range of different areas of expertise, different segments of higher education, et cetera. The other thing I also just want to say out loud while I'm mentioning this, we had very few applications from students last year for either of our boards. And so we've been working with partners to identify channels for getting the word out specifically to students. Could be higher education students, across the board to be on both this board and the Community Engagement Advisory Board. So I just want to put in a special plug for that. We'd like to make sure that students and families are a part of these as well. So we'll be looking for your input, and we'll share the materials, and especially once the application is live, and would appreciate your support in getting the word out.
Sorry, just real quick about the students. Do they have a shorter term, or I don't remember in the handbook? 3 years is kind of a large commitment for folks that, you know, probably graduate in that time period.
That's a good point. That's not a question that we've considered yet. So why don't I take that back, and we'll discuss that with the ad hoc committee of the governing board. Right now, there's no provision for terms to differ based on where someone is employed or whether they're a student or not right now.
We always have trouble with students. They're always such a valuable asset, but you know, they have a lot of other stuff going on usually, and so more than 6 months to a year is difficult for them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Right now, the one provision that I think we have is that if, you know, someone is on the board and then changes employment in a way that introduces a conflict of interest, we can go to kind of the next candidate that had applied originally. But you're raising a really important point, so we will put that on our to-do list.
Is there any potential to offer some kind of incentive or stipend for the hard to recruit groups like a student?
We can explore that possibility. I'm not sure what is feasible. We, of course, are able to cover travel within California for people to come to Sacramento, but I think you're asking a slightly different question. So we can put that on our to-do list to explore as well and see if anything is feasible. Any other questions? All right, so with that, we'll take a 5-minute break. Let's see, so it's 10:44 right now. Why don't we round up to 10:50? We'll just keep the meeting open, but you can go on mute and turn off your camera, and then we'll reconvene in about 5 minutes. Thank you. All right, how about we start again in about 30 seconds, if you can find your way back to your screen. All right, I think we're all back, and we'll jump back in. So for the next session, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ryan, our Director of Data Programs.
Thank you, Marianne, and good morning, everybody. It's raining pretty hard here in San Diego. I hope that wherever you are calling from, its weather is better. I wanted to welcome you and thank you for joining us here at the advisory board meeting, and in particular for joining me for this activity. I had a chance to see folks from both advisory boards one-on-one since the last meeting, sharing resources and stuff like that. It's also nice to see everybody here in this formal setting. So welcome again, and thank you for your time. In this section of our time together, I'm going to be showing you teacher training dashboard related topics. And I'll be asking for you to share your thoughts with us about which topics you think will offer the most value to the public. This is not so much a vote as much as it is seeing where your thoughts are and where the patterns are and how that lines up with some of the other information that we've gathered during the user-centered design process and also during the 18-month planning process before that led up to the creation of our office. While we talk about this today, I wanted to invite you to reflect on something that I've been thinking about, which is that the P20W data set is made of 150 plus data points across 13 data partners. And when joined, this becomes a data set that contains a lot of details, which is great because with a lot of details comes a lot of opportunity, but also presents to us a collective opportunity to think really hard, use all of our expertise and experience to prioritize where our focus goes and where our analytic thinking should go in the face of all of these choices. So we'll revisit that more during a round of input. But first, a review of what we've learned so far from the teacher training task force and also the user-centered design process that the staff have been working on since January of this year. So members of the Data and Tools Advisory Board, give me a thumbs up if you are ready to move on to the background. Okay, here we go. Okay, so recall that the teacher training dashboard will visualize data points from the P20W data system. We are building on a foundation of a lot of work that folks did in the 18-month planning process and also last year, 2022, when the teacher training task force identified topics to focus on, along with the data points that we'll need to inform those topics. And so broadly speaking, topics include things like teacher training pipelines, employment-related things, and then retention-related things, just broadly speaking. And we'll, in a moment, get into sort of the more of the granular elements of that. The idea of the teacher training dashboard is that we hope decision makers and the public in general will use the teacher training dashboards to learn more about topics like teacher shortages, and also address topics like diversity in the teacher workforce. So that's sort of the foundation that we're building on, the work that's been done so far, and also what we hope the value will be of a dashboard like this. Next slide, please. Okay, so digging into the next level of detail here, within the topics identified by the teacher training task force, there are more granular questions that a teacher training dashboard can show. And you have some of the examples here. There's 6 examples. I'll read just a couple of them. So for example, exploring the types of certificates or degrees that educator preparation program participants completed at a community college or 4-year institution, just as one example. So this is going beyond the sort of broader topics and into the specific questions that form the landscape for each of those topics. Another example is the number of years between earning a credential and securing a position in a California public school and the median number of years working as an educator. Those are some of the things that came up during the teacher training task force and also in some of the conversations that we've been having in the interviews that we've done during our user-centered design process that started in January. Next slide, please. Okay, along with that are variables that will empower visitors of the dashboards to disaggregate and compare outcomes, which we know and you know, and also our community has reminded us in previous meetings that is a critical approach for using data to promote equity. So any variable that we have, many of the variables that we have can use to disaggregate into groups to help us understand similarities and differences in outcomes across things like educator demographics and characteristics, location-related things, and then time-related things like academic years. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is something that's come up as a pattern that we're very interested in exploring, and is a profile of user that emerged first during the 18-month planning process that led up to the creation of our office. It then emerged again as we interviewed and analyzed interview responses for themes that will feed our design process. That's in the user-centered design process that we started in January. And we're thinking of this group of dashboard users as we around our office have been calling this profile data ambassadors. And I'll just give a couple of brief descriptions of what we think this type of user could be like. First, they prefer a visualization or some type of summary tool over a raw data set. Second, they've got an audience and they want accessible data displays to share evidence with them. All right, so they're frequently and regularly in front of people who are interested in any research topic in general, but for the purposes of this dashboard, teacher training, teacher retention, teacher shortages, that type of thing, and are interested in helping those audiences grasp the ideas by reducing the complexity of a lot of the research has done into more summary types of tools, visualizations, writing, that type of thing. And then finally, they are, and this is crucial, the data ambassadors are relied upon in their own professional and personal networks as an expert data user. So they're thought of as somebody who understands not only the topic of teacher training and retention, but also all of the evidence underneath it, the key things and variables that influence how we analyze this topic and how we choose to address it, and then are relied upon within those communities to act as folks who vet for decisions and give advice on things like that. Again, sort of features of the users that have come up as we have asked people to share their stories with us and the types of things that motivate them to use data dashboards. And so now that you know a little bit about the way we've begun thinking of this type of user, I want to invite you to take a moment just for a few seconds right now and reflect on your own personal and professional networks. Who's someone that you know that fits this description? It might be you, might be somebody else, and just take a mental note down. And what I mean by that is literally think of the person's name. Don't say the person's name here in the public meeting, but think of it. Because as I ask you for your input over the next few slides, I'd like for you to very specifically imagine that person by name as we discuss what the possibilities are and what you think should be a priority. I'm going to wait just 1 or 2 seconds here. Give me a thumbs up when you are thinking about the name of somebody who fits the data ambassador profile. Okay, see a few thumbs. Great. Okay. On the next slide, we are going to do the first round of input. I'm so excited to hear what you think about this. But first, I want to pause and leave a little bit of space here just for you to ask some questions if there are things that I need to clarify about what we have talked about so far, either how we got to where we're at, the user-centered design process so far, or the idea of a data ambassador.
Hi, this is Jake. I'd love to hear how you kind of came up with this data ambassador person in the process that you took to get there.
Yep. Okay. So great question. Thank you for asking it. In the 18-month planning process, part of what was done there was something very common in user-centered design, which is thinking about users of dashboards and data in terms of their roles. So for example, folks who do research, folks who are students or families who have students who are going from high school into post-secondary, policymakers, that type of thing. So role-based persona is really important because it helps us to understand the whole landscape of what can possibly be done with dashboards. If you think of that as like one axis, there's this other axis of the extent to which anybody in those roles might use a data dashboard. And what we wanted to be able to do is think not only about what a person's job demands of them, but also appreciate that within each of those jobs are different kinds of data users. So for example, within researchers, people use data differently. Many, I think on average, you might expect that a researcher would want to get to the underlying data. But as we did our interviews, ran into folks who were like, well, I should prefer to have the visualizations and just start there, right? And so that's one example. Family member is another example, right? Like maybe not visiting the dashboards very often, but on the other hand, maybe they are. And so looking at something like the ambassador data user, which has more to do with how often they visit the data dashboards and then what they do with it versus what their roles are, gave us the opportunity to think about, oh, within each of these roles, there is still a diversity of the way that people use data. So that's kind of the idea, adds the second access to that persona.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Lisa, I see your hand up.
Hi, thank you. I just need to go to like a 10,000-foot view.
Please.
And please indulge my questions, because I really am kind of stuck at the 10,000-foot view. So thank you so much for the background on the teacher training and retention dashboard. So ultimately, I'm just kind of honing in on the next step. The CTC data partners identify the specific data points they are willing to share with CTC. So in other words, none of this is a done deal yet in terms of like all the data points that are needed to answer all the 7 questions that are in the file that was just shared?
Well, in the sense that, like with the P20W data set right now, as it is, that there are formal processes that require agreement on the actual data points, right? So it's kind of the same thing there. Like if you think of the P20W data set, we look at that and all the questions that we can answer, those are all in the participation agreement that was signed last year. Now, based on the guidance of the task force, we've got teacher retention related topics. And within that task force conversation, folks look at the P20W data set that is, or the data points that are in the participation agreement, and then identified more data points that would be needed to answer those questions. That group of data points that are needed to answer the questions that are not on the participation agreement, those are the ones that we sort of bring together and then as part of the formal process, then bring to the board and for a vote.
Right, so in other words, like all the data points are not yet settled, which is why they're not on that list. The list that.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're identified, but haven't gone to a vote yet. So the work has been done to look at, these are the ones that we need. And then now the remainder of the process is going to the vote.
Okay, terrific, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Others? Okay. Now it's time to get some input. I'm super excited about this. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so in a moment, or actually we can do this now, as we can go ahead and launch the poll. We're gonna do this through a Zoom poll. And what you see in front of you are so think of it as like 2 levels of research question. There are granular research questions, like looking at how long it takes to earn a living wage once you graduate from college, like that level. And then many of those that feed up to broader topics. And what you see in front of you on this poll called Advisory Board Input are the broad topics, right? We're gonna dig into, don't worry, I know what you're thinking. We wanna get into the granular research questions. We are gonna do those after this one. But the ask here is to review the broad topics and then thinking about the way you do your work day to day, which is sort of what we're trying to wrap our head around, and thinking about what data ambassadors would need, especially if you consider yourself one of those. Select 3 of these that you think are what I consider the domino kinds of topics, which are, if we can answer some questions about these topics, they knock down a lot of dominoes in our sort of analytic process and help us to understand a lot more. So these are the high priority ones. Let's go with 3 of those, not in any particular order. And then we'll show the results and sort of see if they tend to collect around particular topics or if the interest is widespread. So go ahead and do that now. And we'll give you as much time as you need here. Once we have like a high percentage of responses, then I'm gonna ask Shannon to show the results and let's see where we're at. Do take your time though. I know like you need to sort of look at this and process. And Shannon, I can't see the percent responses. I don't know if you can see those, but I'll leave it to you to once we get to a threshold to show.
Can I ask a clarifying question on one of them,
Please.
or should I follow up separately?
No, please.
What does strong pipeline mean? Would it be, or is it implying that there would simply be like some kind of dashboard around, here are all the people who entered teacher prep programs for this year and their characteristics numerically, demographically?
All of that, plus a research question that came up during the planning process, which is, where are what subject areas have teacher shortages, and are the pipelines to teacher training addressing those needs? Do they map to where communities need teachers? Does that answer the question?
So it will also be by like numbers, by subject, by credential subject area, by region? Yeah,
so I'll go just to be a little more specific here. So if I look at the document that had the history of the teacher dashboard, if you look at the research questions related to that broad topic, one example is, for students in teacher preparation programs, what disciplines do they pursue for their community college awards and bachelor's degrees? That's one research question related to this. Another is, are training candidates studying subjects where there are not enough teachers? And then I'll read one more. What types of training programs are prospective teachers participating in?
I see Marshall has his hand up, but before I do that, I want to flag that I'm going to end the poll now, unless anybody has any final thoughts. Seeing none, I'm ending the poll. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Go ahead, Marshall.
Yeah, thank you so much, and good morning, good afternoon. Following up on Jennifer's point, so is pipeline defined as, do we have, like, in the aggregate in terms of the state labor force of teachers, or is it defined as, do we have enough teachers in areas where we need them the most?
So the hope with the dashboard is that we can answer both of those. So you've got a general, like, statewide, and then you've got the opportunity to disaggregate. One of the, I'll give just a little bit more detail here that came up around this, the data ambassador profile, was the idea that this is the type of data user who's familiar with research, but is then interested in seeing how general research findings play out in local areas. And so the aim is to have the dashboard serve that purpose. So if I know that on average, there's a shortage in math, for example, just arbitrary, just making this up, right? Then what the dashboard might allow you to do is take that general research finding and then look in regional areas across California and see to what extent is that actually true. And so in that way, trying to do both of what you were asking about. Okay, other questions? Okay, I see that we're over time here. I'm gonna keep on moving here. I wanna make sure that be able to show you these. That you should see the advisory board input the results of the poll. Give me a thumbs up really quick and let me know that you can see that. We're gonna save these, and then we'll be looking at, I'll be sharing next steps of what we'll do with this information afterwards. Okay, next slide, please. So we were talking about general topics. So general topics relating to teacher training and retention dashboards. Really, those general topics describe a whole set of research questions. And I want to give a chance to have some conversation about those research questions. So what you see in front of you is an actual, like, specific research question that came out of the teacher training and retention task force group. This one in particular relates to the broad topic of teacher preparation pipeline, the one that we were just talking about. And I'm going to read the question and then give you an opportunity to just comment on how you think answering a question like this would help you in your day-to-day work. If that question is too broad, then I provided a couple of prompts here. So I'll read the question, the research question first, and then the prompts, and then we can go off mute and share. First one is, for students in teacher preparation programs, what disciplines did they pursue for their community college awards and bachelor's degrees? If you had a dashboard that answered that question and could disaggregate to regional areas or in other ways, how would that fit into your day-to-day work? Two more specific prompts for you if you need them. You don't have to use them, but if you need them, what with this information, the dashboard user can blank. And with this information, the dashboard user promotes equity by blank. So you can use either of those prompts to finish the sentence. And I'll turn it over to you now. You could just take yourself off mute or raise your hand and we'll call on you. How would this kind of information fit into your day-to-day work? Big picture here is we want to take the research question and begin to imagine what this looks like in real life for people to use it. So give us a few seconds.
Ryan, is it our work, or is it also possibly the work of the ambassador we're thinking in our head?
Yeah, I would say if you could clarify in your response which either, but if you can clarify in your response what you're thinking about, that would help us a lot.
Got it, thanks.
You're welcome. You can raise your hand or go right off mute, and then we are ready to receive input. Laura.
So I'm thinking about the audience that I work with, which would be counselors, school counselors, college advisors who are working with students in both K-12 and higher ed. And for me, like answering this question, I'm thinking about the way they would use this and how they're advising students. And so being able to look and understand where students are enrolling, what programs they're engaged in, and how that's transferring into the teacher pipeline, especially for students who are looking at different pathways. I think this information would be very helpful to have. Again, that all gets wrapped up in how do we share that with them and make sure it's something that we get into their hands that they understand. But I do think if it was communicated correctly, it would be very useful.
Thank you for that. That's super helpful. Jason.
Yeah, working at a county office of education, I think working directly with our HR directors and supporting recruitment of specific needs of teachers of different ethnicities based upon the data that's being brought forward, and directly looking at the school districts in our county and really across the state of where we see gaps to really focus our recruitment efforts specifically and find ways to focus those recruitment efforts both at the university level as well as in our communities.
Thank you. Also very helpful. Okay. Yeah, just check the chat here. Great. Okay. Got one more of these. Any more on this one before we move on to the next one, the next and final of these questions? Okay, so let's look at the next one. Same thing, exact same exercise, just a different question. This is a research question, came out of the task force, and it is a part of a group of research questions described in the topic teaching programs and credentials. Question is, what types of teacher training programs produce completers who earn credentials? And then we are looking for your reaction to that, and in particular, how you would use that in your day-to-day work. If you had a data dashboard that gave you that information, if you need more specific prompts, you can try to here. With this information, the dashboard user can insert your answer. With this information, the dashboard user promotes equity by, and then you can insert your answer there. Take a moment to reflect on that, and then either raise your hand or go off mute.
And Ryan, can I ask a question? This is
Please.
Tamika.
Okay.
When they talk about what type of teacher training programs produce completers, are they looking at alternative programs, inexpensive programs, or, you know, programs that have greater completion rates and all of that?
Yeah, so the categories that have come up in conversation so far are like the standard ones that come up in the 4-year programs, but also teacher residencies, and then internships and things like that.
Apprenticeships, okay.
Yeah, so it's like all of the different ways that one might become a teacher, and looking at, if you look at a group of completers, what share of those came through each of the programs is sort of one way to interpret that question.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Ryan, this is Liberty. It's not asking about which completers do or don't earn credentials. Completers means people earn credentials. Is that, am I interpreting that correctly?
I'm looking at it again, make sure I understand the question. I think so, but let me look. Right. So if you bring it down to, let's look at teacher residencies, for example, as one path, right? So one way of interpreting this question is, for folks who go through teacher residency as a path, what share of them complete and earn credentials? But then can also ask that question about any other path.
I'm struggling a little bit with this one because it's also time to completion. So it wouldn't be helpful for me in terms of equity if it took me 10 years to complete, versus, you know, a program that is going to streamline this approach, particularly if I have credit for prior learning, or, you know, there's other nuances here in addition to cost.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so let me just say it back and make sure, because I think this is a nuance could be really important, is really important. So not just the completion, like the eventual earning of the credential, but other real life factors that come into play for like any human being who's trying to like get this done, right? Like
exactly.
Okay. Are there any, Tamika, besides time, in addition to time, that come to mind for you?
Cost. And then credit for prior learning.
Okay. Thank you. Laura?
Yeah, I think in addition to what Tamika mentioned, the other thing that I was thinking about is, by collecting this sort of in aggregate, I'm wondering how helpful it is, right? Like if I had specific institutions, because there's probably going to be a wide variability within like the classifications that you use to collect the data. So I don't know how helpful it actually ends up being. So I'm thinking at it from an advising perspective. If I don't know the individual institutions, and maybe one that has really high persistence and completion and earn credentials versus one that's really low, what am I going to do with it? I mean, knowing that maybe this pathway happens to be a better producer of completers still doesn't give me anything in an advising space that I can use. So just another thought about maybe how you're going to classify the training programs. I don't know if it could be collected with more specific information on the institution. That would be more meaningful, I think, for me.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you for sharing that. So, so just acknowledging, to summarize, just acknowledging that collectively looking at the outcomes of any particular path, like within that can be variation based on institution and any number of other things. Simply knowing the rate across all institutions or for a program may not be as helpful. Okay, thank you, Laura. Marshall?
Are you using credential? Is like that synonymous with licensed teachers or educators?
Yeah, so those are, that is a specific definition, as a credential awarded by CTC.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think with that, I think it would be helpful from a research standpoint to know what completion looks like in general, and then what average time to completion estimate mentioned, and then also what like the credentials look like separately too, to see if there's any type of disparities. Because those two, it can just be two different research questions that tell you two completely different things, or tell you things that are complementary to one another. So I would recommend sort of splitting up looking at completers, separately, and then looking at credentials. And then I think the third part of that can be this question here.
Got it. Okay, so completing the coursework in the program as one, being awarded the credential as another.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I wanted to thank everybody for helping with this. I really appreciate it. I know we're over time, but I really wanted to get a chance to hear, because of the nuance that y'all bring to these questions. It's really, I think it's such an opportunity for us to explore how we can make these dashboards in a way that really gets at what happens in real life. And so I very, very much appreciate this. If we can go into the next slide, I'll just close up really quickly with next steps. Important for me that you know what happens next. We're finalizing the dashboard design brief to begin building prototypes. When the prototypes are built, it'll be another opportunity to look at them, play with them a little bit, give some responses to them. And so we're taking everything that we've learned so far, building off of what's happened in the 18-month planning process and the task force, and also this latest round of interviews and exploration, and then having that documented in a really clear design brief for the designers. The second is we're going to take all the input today that we received from you, super important input that we take really seriously, find the themes and patterns and combine it with what else that we've heard and search for more themes. And then finally, looking at those themes to see how our current assumptions about data ambassadors and users might change based on what we've heard today. So that's what's next. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to, I think Jane has the slide for public comment.
Thank you. So we invite public comment at this point. Members of the public who want to comment should use the chat feature to send a message via the Q&A function to indicate your interest. During the public comment period, a staff member will unmute you when it's your turn, and you have up to 2 minutes to comment. Please note that while C2C promotes communication and transparency, C2C advisory board members and staff are not required to respond to public comment. Additionally, the advisory board may not discuss or act on any matter raised during the public comment period that is not included on our meeting agenda today, except to place the matter on a future meeting agenda. You can also submit written public comments to info@c2c.ca.gov. I want to acknowledge some questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to start off by giving those folks an opportunity to raise their question. Let's see. It looks like we've got Liz from Public Advocates. Liz, would you like to make a comment? Shannon, can you take Liz off mute?
Liz, you should be able to unmute.
Go ahead, Liz. All right, moving on. Liz, go ahead and type in the Q&A if you're not able to come off mute, and we'll continue. I want to Robert, yes, you can submit a comment without speaking. You can go ahead and share that. And Liz, it looks like you are off mute. You want to go ahead?
Yes. Am I okay to do public comment right now?
Yes.
Okay. So sorry about the confusion. Too many screens open. I'm Liz Guillen with Public Advocates. I will raise my hand to reflect Public Advocates as data ambassadors. Our ultimate objective is to bring community voices to decisions about them. And of course, this includes the information that is used for these decisions. It would be great if those communities could access the information directly for themselves, but in most policy-related contexts, that is still an aspiration or in development, as in the work you are doing. I really appreciate the sample questions that Ryan proposed, especially with this information, the database user promotes equity by. That is a really great question, or a really great statement for us to consider. I appreciate the clarity and friendliness of the backgrounder as to purpose and questions to be explored. Knowing that it is a general description, however, I want to hone in on question 5 about the extent of those who enter the profession through emergency permits, waivers, and intern pathways. And bullet 3, as to types of schools, we would want to make sure that the types include student demographics, income level, geography, race, as well as grade level. The other things I'd like to make sure are tracked are the extent to which fully credentialed teachers stay or not, as compared to other lesser prepared teachers. I think that is what question 6, bullet 2 is getting at, but not sure. And if any of the current databases like CalPADS or CTC's database have information on the teacher's professional development exposure, to be able to see how that correlates with retention. One more question that could be answered if the CDE is connecting K-12 student course taking data to the higher ed teacher candidate data is what high schools and high school pathway programs are effective in grooming future teachers. This gets at the pipeline and has the potential to increase diversity in the teacher workforce as well. I appreciate the hard work that's being done to date, and I look forward to in-person meetings to be able to look you in the eye and provide encouragement. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. I want to note 2 questions that were previously answered in the Q&A. First off, the question was, can you share who the system integrator is?
Jane, you just went on mute.
All right, I was unable to unmute myself. All right, thank you. I want to acknowledge 2 previous questions that have been answered. The first was, can you share who the system integrator is? I've dropped a link in the chat that goes to a blog post about that. And also, who's your new general counsel? Julia Blair will be joining CTC this coming Monday. Moving back into the Q&A, I'll acknowledge Carol's question and Brianna's questions. We can take you off mute at this point if you'd like to make a public comment. And Shannon, can you control the mute on that?
You should both be unmuted.
This is Carol Tsushima, and I am in San Bernardino County. My question was just wanting us to, I'm just curious as to how CTE teacher data is going to be part of this dashboard. The route that CTE teachers take is very different in getting into the classroom, and yet we have such a shortage of them, which creates significant problems for districts to maintain or sustain programming. If we were to look at the questions as they are now, and you were looking at the teacher credentialing programs, those teachers, I would say 9.5 times out of 10 already have a teaching position. So really it's not really going to show you who's in the pipeline necessarily to fill positions. It's going to show you who is already in the pipeline in a position. And so it has a different flavor, but it definitely has had an impact across the state with regards to being able to provide equitable pathways for our students that don't take necessarily the traditional route. So that was just a question I had, and maybe an ask to consider that as this dashboard's also being built. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol. Brianna, I see that your question was answered. At this point, I'm not seeing any additional requests for public comment. This is your opportunity to type in the Q&A if you'd like to make public comment. Carolyn, I see you've got a question. Shannon, can we take Carolyn off mute?
Thank you so much. Just a quick process question, and thank you for this tremendous work. Will the in-person meetings taking place after July 1 continue to allow for virtual address and or observation by the public?
I'm happy to address that. Yes, we will continue to broadcast our meetings on Zoom and allow for public comment via Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. At this point, I see no additional comments, questions, or requests for comment in the Q&A.
Jean, there was one written comment from Robert Gomez. Do you wish to read that, or should we just put that in the record?
We can take that into the record. All right. No additional comments at this time.
Thank you, Jane, and many thanks to the advisory board members. Special thanks to the public too. As we just mentioned, we're glad that you're here. We want to continue to have your voices be a part of that, which is why we're going to continue to broadcast via Zoom even once we're back in person, because we don't want to ask you to travel to us just to be able to be a part of this. So thank you for that. If there are no objections, we will adjourn the meeting and appreciate everyone's engagement. Thank you.